Like even on our video walls within the hospitals, we published pictures of our staff and showing that. It's in the newsletter. They did a press release. They did LinkedIn, Facebook. Like it was just this outpouring of love and attention for this team that historically had felt like they weren't professionals. And that was something that we set out right from the get-go to change.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with the frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're wicked glad you did. Now, turn on those washes and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Brian Dolan, Vice President of Resource Management at Bayhealth Medical Center. We're going to be talking with Brian today about the HPN Award for SPD Department of the Year, which the SPD department at Bayhealth Medical Center recently was awarded in 2021. And this is going to be an inspirational story. Brian has so much to tell us in this interview today about leadership, about transformational change. And I'm not even going to spoil the episode for you, but this is a fantastic way to kick off season 13, Hank.
Yeah, Justin, and I've known Brian for a couple of years, but I've known him as more of a data guy. He's in love with sterile processing data, with OR data. But this topic is actually not about data. It's going to be about people and about employee satisfaction. But he's got a great story to tell and a great perspective to add, I think, to these conversations about improving departments and even sometimes winning awards. So I can't wait for this conversation as well.
Yeah, he has quite a diverse skill set, as you described, the human to the data, and also really interesting, not only in all the areas of healthcare, but also he told us after the interview that he was an educator for over 10 years. So fantastic. It definitely comes into play in how he approaches this topic today. We're going to be right back with Brian Dolan, Vice President of Resource Management at Bayhealth Medical Center. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Brian Dolan, Vice President of Resource Management at Bayhealth Medical Center, and we're going to be talking today because the Sterile Processing Department at Bayhealth was announced by Healthcare Purchasing News as this year's SPD Department of the Year. And we just love sharing successes in the industry. Yeah, we can give you a woot woot. I know nobody can see you while we're recording this, but we'll give you a woot woot. Brian, thanks so much for coming on to talk about this with us today.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Brian, why don't we start by having you tell us just about your background. For anybody who isn't following you on LinkedIn, and as Hank loves to say, the easiest way to get on Beyond Clean is to have a social media presence, and you're doing that very well. So anybody who's listening who isn't connected with you on LinkedIn, definitely look Brian up. But why don't you tell everybody about your background?
Yeah, definitely. I am a sterile processing professional, but also a supply chain professional at the same time. I wear multiple hats. Currently, I'm the Vice President for Resource Management at Bayhealth. I've been there for the last year and a half. I came at a great time right with the pandemic, but it was a good time to transition.
Right.
But I started out my career as a surgical technician to help pay through college and ended up working in peri-op and getting a lot of different experiences and then migrated over into supply chain. So I have about 18 years of experience in all these different realms, both as frontline employees and as a leader.
What a great combination. OR, SPD, and supply chain. I mean, that's really the trifecta. We're going to get into this, I think, a little bit later too, but you just know how to talk to one of those audiences at any given time, which has to put you in a position to be very successful in communicating strategic initiatives.
No, definitely. I think I always consider myself kind of like a translator, because I'm always often caught in those kind of triangle discussions where it's somebody from an OR is talking to a finance person, talking to a doctor. And I'm often saying, okay, wait, hold on a second. So I'm interpreting in this language. And then, but it's gotten me really good at storytelling. So that's probably a big perk, because I've been able to get really good and crafty when it comes to trying to put messages out there.
Oh, that is really hilarious. All right. So let's talk about the award. And I know Hank's been through this process. And so maybe you could just talk about how you apply for it. And then even more importantly, what kind of a response did your team have once they learned that the award was given?
Yeah, so definitely as I was interviewing for this role, actually, one of the things that came out of my boss's mouth, the chief operating officer, one of the first things she said is that her goal was to improve sterile processing. That level of engagement at the C-suite was critical for us as we went down this journey. And so, I call her my chief innovation officer from that perspective, because she really did set the stage for us to be successful. And so when I hit the ground running, the first thing we did is I dove into trying to find the right leadership. And so I had to go in and hire all new leadership for the department right out of the gate, because it was a consultant driven department when I got here. But as we got the leadership in and we set that big, hairy, audacious goal for SPD of the year, we started immediately with digging into all the different pieces and aspects around people, process, and technology. So as we prepared our application, we really sat down and reflected back on what did we actually accomplish. And it was really, again, like writing a story. We took a lot of time and detail into really making sure we were telling the story of the team, of the collaboration we had with the operating room, looking through all of our data. What did we learn from it? What did we explore as we were going through process improvement activities? And as leaders, how did we influence and motivate our team in order to become more effective as we went through? So it was really a journal almost of a giant blog of what we were actually accomplishing throughout the last year and a half. And as we were writing it, we just kept getting more and more excited. We're like, gosh, this has to be the best application that's ever been out there. Patting ourselves on the back as we're going through it. But it also helped us from a process improvement standpoint, because we also identified areas where we're like, oh, we didn't exactly hit that completely yet. So it gave us an opportunity also to say, where else do we need to keep going? And it helped inform our strategic planning process for the next year.
What I love about that is you just described to us how your storytelling abilities helped you translate. But it also sounds like by engaging your teammates in the department, you were also kind of teaching everybody how to tell a story, which really helps so much with cultural alignment and messaging, because you're not the only person that's going to be able to talk to supply chain or the OR at any given point during a day.
Exactly. And that's where it was fun, because one of the things I didn't say about my background is I actually spent 12 years also as an instructor at the University of Kansas. And so it felt very much like I was a teacher grading an assignment, because I was writing back comments going, please emphasize more on this point, or please insert more data here, or describe your journey on this aspect. And so it was entertaining for me to be able to say, hey, how do we tell this more complete story? But more so, how am I telling their story? So it was definitely, fun to be able to see them light up and get excited about something they wanted to emphasize and what points they wanted to make sure that really came across in the application.
So, Brian, I want to go back to a part of Justin's question, and I want to make sure to tee it up to get the answer from you, because you put all the work in up front. You talked about kind of the interaction of the staff and everything and in that process. But after you won the award, I know it's very recent, so this is still fresh on the mind of everyone, but what was the feedback from the staff and from the department and leadership there to see that all that work and all the storytelling accomplished the goal? And obviously the goal wasn't to win the award, it was to become excellent, right? But you won the award, you got recognized. So what impact did that have on the team?
Well, it was kind of fun, actually, as we were getting ready to announce that we knew about it. because we kept it really quiet. And I remember my director and I were like, God, we want to tell people. And I remember the day we took the pictures, actually, we were gathering the entire team to come in and take the pictures, and they had no clue. They were like, why are we taking these pictures? You know, why is marketing so attentive right now? Because it was not like, well, you know, we've had some stories in the newsletters and things like that, but nothing like a full photo shoot. And so I was like, everyone won America's Next Top Model. No, it was, we were having an annual report due, and SPD is getting featured because we've done such great work this year. And people were like, oh, okay, yeah. And I remember one of the managers coming up going, you're lying to me, aren't you? And it's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, we won the award, didn't we? And I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Let's just get the pictures. So immediately, though, after we did the photo shoot and we got the official okay to start telling people, we went to senior leadership and announced it, both my director and I, and we got in front of that team and we did the confetti streamers, and it was just a big kind of fun thing to do. So all the vice presidents and senior executives got to hear it first, and then we went right to the department. And we told the teams, and we had literally team members teary-eyed, excited, never feeling that level of recognition before. It was a celebration. And we had one employee who's been at Bayhealth now for 42 years. She is a Triple Crown certified SPD tech now, and she wasn't that before we got there from a leadership standpoint, supporting her journey. And she was like, I've never felt so honored, appreciated, and supported in my career. And that made me, and I'm getting the goosebumps right now, it just made me feel so good to hear that, because it meant we did our job right as leaders.
It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that so few folks actually get to that level. Like, you're totally right. You know, the opportunities for recognition, we've been trying very hard in this industry over the last couple of years, you know, to change that dynamic. But still to this day, there are some things you can do to get individually recognized, like through certification and through other leadership and growth opportunities. But there's only a small number of options to get that team recognition, that our entire team from top to bottom, from newest to oldest, everybody gets that same level of recognition that we have accomplished something to be proud of. And to get that feedback, especially from administrators in the community, in the industry, everyone looks to see who won the award this year. And all that focus, gets to be on the folks that, to your point before, they went from on the list of problem departments or challenging departments to the very top echelon of departments in the country. And I mean, that's just a great story, and there's a ton to be proud of, for sure.
No, yeah. And that's what's been great, is that the organization has supported telling the story. I didn't expect the level of kind of publicity we would just get internally from it. Even on our video walls within the hospitals, we published pictures of our staff and showing that. It's in the newsletter. They did a press release. They did LinkedIn, Facebook. It was just this outpouring of love and attention for this team that historically had felt like they weren't professionals. And that was something that we set out right from the get-go to change.
Now, Brian, I want to get to the meat of this interview, because it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And as Justin said, I have actually 2016, maybe, our department won the same award in Kentucky. And our journey included a lot of emphasis on staff satisfaction, but you don't see that a lot. So when I saw that theme come up in your story with your department, I was like, okay, there's a story here that needs to be told, because there's all kinds of implications for staffing. There's all kinds of implications for quality, for efficiency, for cost savings. All that has to be included in this journey toward excellence. But so often, no one ever stops to think, are the people who are so efficient, so well paid, are they actually happy? And I could tell from the article that you did emphasize that. So let's just kind of start. Why include staff satisfaction as such a key metric in this mission to improve the department?
It was easy from the perspective that when you really want to transform a department, you have to make sure from a leadership perspective that you're taking care of your human systems. You can't have quality, you can't have efficiency, you can't have sustainability without the people that are behind it. We got to remember, we're not an automotive manufacturing plant with robots that is engineering these types of things. And so we have people who are the heart of our work that we do every single day. And so much of our work is human touch that it has to be an emphasis. And so as we looked at examining the human systems when we got here as a United New Leadership team, we saw a lot of inconsistencies in how they were treated. There was really no history for individual consideration. Their voice was not being incorporated in planning. They did not know what was going on across the organization outside their walls. They felt no communication with the ORs and with the physicians. They felt like they didn't have the education and tools to be successful. And so when we started really interviewing team members and talking to them directly, that message came out loud and clear that they weren't motivated because they had no really influence from a leadership perspective to guide them in any direction. They didn't have a goal to hit. They didn't have the tools and the vocabulary to know what they were really doing besides getting work done. And so when they have this lack of access to resources, it can contribute to high turnover and poor engagement. And so we really set out to say our human systems have to be as equal to our quality focus, because without the humans, we can't have the quality.
You know, it's so hard to get from that point A to point B. And I imagine when you're first engaging that to turn that around, that there's a lot of noise that's in there. And so I really wanted to ask you this question for emerging leaders. How many times does somebody get promoted from a supervisor role to a manager role, or they get tech to supervisor and they're kind of in that position where they've been a colleague and now all of a sudden they're doing that, and all the noise that they were part of, they now have to try to quell, or they're just new to the department and they don't know the culture and they're trying to instill. This is a serious skill here, is how did you weed out the complaints or the lack of motivation, et cetera, that was legitimate from the ones that were just part of that sort of, I don't want to say it was toxic because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but some of the toxic behavior that can occur in a culture that's not fully aligned like that. How did you tease that out?
No, I totally agree with you on the fact that is a skill set, and it's an art. It's not a science. And you have to really kind of focus in. But the first thing is you got to treat everyone with the same consideration right off the gate. So we met with, every single staff member, regardless of any previous history or whatever the consultants maybe at the time were saying they thought about an individual. We gave everyone the same equal footing and consideration from day one. And so as we collected information from team members, we looked at trends. And so that's one of the big things to identify if something's truly valid or not, is you go through in the trending. And the other piece of it is going and seeing. So it's very easy for a new leader or any leader to sit behind a desk, get people to come in your office, tell you these issues, complaints, concerns, and then go, okay, that must be reality. But what we did was we really went out and saw what their work was doing. We went and talked to their customers to determine if things were being valid concerns. We took a full 360 kind of panoramic viewpoint of all the issues that were being brought up, to say, how do we really get to the root cause of those issues and determine if they were valid or not? So I think a lot of times when we hear feedback or noise, we take it to heart. And so it's important to actually go through in that validation process.
Now, Brian, you've already mentioned a couple of challenges related to maybe team satisfaction in your discussion about leadership, and then your discussion about communication and kind of feeling like they didn't have a voice. But what are some of the other challenges maybe that you experienced in this department transformation, or maybe previous experiences with departments that tend to impact that team morale and that team satisfaction?
So a couple of the areas that I saw in the past that really kind of impacted, especially in sterile processing, was intellectual stimulation and the ability for the team to feel like they were valued as a professional within the healthcare continuum. So when I talk about intellectual stimulation, I'm talking about the investment that an organization makes into their competency but also continual development. So having a clear career path, having the ability to understand that there's resources there to invest in them getting certified, becoming triple crown, quadruple crown, being able to let them know that there are different types of roles for them and that they can be a part of that development for others as well. That was something that I know in the past that I've seen where sometimes departments have people that are just walking into these roles from various departments or outside of healthcare, and they don't really know what it is and they don't understand. And so they get confused and frustrated because they haven't had the proper training, or that the organization hasn't really taken the time to say, hey, we should put you through a class, or hey, we should encourage certification. Here are the resources we're going to give you in order for you to really understand your profession. That's where we saw missing links, because then people would just get frustrated when there's errors and other things. They're like, well, how was I supposed to know that? I didn't know that. Like, that's complicated, and like all these pieces. But that also goes back and connects to their consideration as a professional. A lot of times I've seen in different places that I've worked, the sterile processing department isn't always considered to be at the same level as a nurse or a surgical technician, or even, any other healthcare practitioner that's in the facility. And so when we looked at specifically here at Bayhealth and in my previous organization that I was at, we really had to say, how do we elevate the stance here? Because they felt almost like servants to other departments, and that the voice and concerns that were being voiced from those other departments, like in the form of a defect report or a quality report, were being taken for Bible, but not the voice of the sterile processing technician. So, for example, let's talk about holes in wrap. Everyone has holes in wrap. And when I'm talking about that, I mean like when you have a blue wrap set and you have a hole in it that's detected in the OR right before they go to use the instruments, and they go, oh, the set's unsterile. The first reaction I've seen a lot of places is, oh, sterile processing, they put the hole there. It's their fault.
Right.
And with a little pin and needles, right? Like, sabotage.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, oh, who do we want to get today? Whoa, wait, don't we realize that actually puts more work on ourselves? So we have to reprocess it now and go through that whole workflow again. So immediately they get this negative vibe from their customers that it's like, this must be your fault. So when we started, actually, we had a surgeon that was, having some issues with holes in wrap. And when we went through and actually explained to the surgeon, we were like, there's a whole continuum of handling that happens that a hole can occur. Once we wrap the set, we lose complete visibility. And then it gets transferred from the sterilizer to a shelf, to a case cart, back to maybe a shelf, to a table, and then it's handled, maybe carried down the hall. It just depends on all the different steps in the workflows within your ORs. And so at any point in that time, a badge could have snagged it. A rack that had a rigid edge could have snagged it. They could have dragged it inadvertently off the case cart, and that shelf in the case cart had a sharp point. So that hole could have happened anywhere. But in the assumption and the feeling that the staff were seeing was that it was SPD's fault. And instead of understanding that there were so many different error points that could happen. And so when we explained that to the surgeon and we shared this with the staff, is that he came back and he was like, I never thought of it that way. He's like, it is something that is really everyone's responsibility. Thank you for really explaining that and opening my eyes that it's not just an SPD issue. And so just things like that, when you see a trend with either that issue or, I didn't get the set that I needed today, it's an immediate assumption that sterile processing was not doing their job, when it's actually a multifactorial system issue that has to be really assessed and looked at. And so we even just recently did a presentation for our surgical executive committee on multiple different types of errors that get reported, and how it's not just sterile processing. There's joint responsibility between the OR and sterile processing for this whole instrument continuum to work appropriately. And a lot of the physicians were like, wow, I guess I just never thought of it that way. And so when we started sharing this, and then when the staff saw us backing them up when variances would come up and explaining that we don't own this one, this is not us, this was not you, this is a learning moment for the system. They started going, wow, they have my back. they actually have my back. And that's where we started seeing people coming to life and feeling like, wow, I'm not blamed for everything anymore. And this is actually a leadership team who is backing me up 100% of the time. And we own it when
you lifted the weight. Yeah. You lifted the weight.
And our team, we own it when it's our issue. Like I read all of our variance reports and the responses that my leaders put in. And when I'm reading them, there are, thank you for putting this variance in. We own this. We are going to educate our staff. Our job is to make sure that we're consistent every single time. They have a very consistent way of responding to it. But when it's not necessarily our issue, they are the first ones to go in and start quoting AAMI standards and providing the exact inscription in the text and the page number of where the standard lives, why we met the standard, or quoting instructions for use from the manufacturers that help dictate and support why we did something, because we're following those, like the Bible, again, for how we process. We're following the standards. And so when we met the standard, we make sure to provide that education and feedback and support our team that it wasn't their fault and they're not accountable for that and they did the right thing, and celebrate that they did the right thing. But also we own when it is ours, and we go back to the staff and give them that accountability too.
So Brian, we've talked a lot about what contributes to low staff morale and staff satisfaction. And I think like anyone who's living in that, they don't need it defined. Like they know what it feels like to be in a department where nobody's happy to be there.
Yes.
For whatever reason it is. And to your point, there's often a lot of reasons, but I want you to maybe paint a picture of what it looks like and feels like to be in a department that is happy, because there are so few departments out there. This is kind of sad to say. There's so few departments where the majority, I'm not even saying every single person, right? But just the majority, that tipping point has been met, that there's more people happy and excited and bought into the mission. And there are people who are complaining and naysaying. What does that feel like to be in such a wonderful, magical place?
Like Disneyland. Sometimes you feel like you're on the teacups and it's spinning too fast, but it's there. But no, seriously, it's when you can walk into the staff lounge and everyone's enjoying themselves and it's not dead quiet, and they're talking about issues and quality and education. And when you are in meetings and leadership are giving them feedback on how to reprocess a particular set or how to correct an issue, and the staff is nodding their heads and they're engaged, and they're not lowering their heads or ignoring the educator. We see that. When I walk into the lounge and people are like, hey, and they're excited to actually see their leaders, it's like, that's a positive thing. Like one of the things that I think is fun too is like when we did our quality assurance program where we have peer checks on instruments, the team came up with this saying, they go QA all day. And so it's fun to go in the lounge and I walk in and I'm like, QA all day. And then they all go QA all day, and it's just like, that joy you see that they enjoy their work and they feel a part of the bigger picture. It's again, it's like Disney, but yet much more dangerous, I guess, with instruments and autoclaves.
Right. Well, you described a lot of, what's the word? Analytical.
Subjective.
Yeah, subjective. That's the word. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, so you describe a lot of subjective signs here. Yeah, you were something, Justin. You're not just eye candy on the podcast.
Every once in a while, candy. I'll finish your sentences for you.
But it's important here, obviously, to trend that you're able to measure. So if anyone's out there and they're starting to be convinced that, oh, yeah, this is a metric I should probably pay attention to. Are my people happy? Where do they even start to measure this? Like, is it something that you're asking them on like an annual kind of survey? Are you asking them in the moment during these staff meetings or shift totals or these walkarounds? Like, how do you do that?
Well, there's definitely a couple ways of doing that. You need to be touching base with people on a routine basis during huddles. You got to have those continual discussions. Don't wait till the end of the year to be able to say, oh, have you been good this year?
Right.
It's like, it's definitely an ongoing thing. One of the things that I always try to, as a behavior, I try to teach people is always leave a conversation with saying, is there anything I can do for you? And I think that's important for a leader. But also the way that we're concretely measuring that with numbers is our annual engagement survey. And so employee engagement surveys are done organization wide. But in my division, we pay special attention to it. And we actually have an employee engagement committee that is comprehensive of clinical engineering, supply chain, and sterile processing. And they all come together to work on these types of things. But what they do is they look at the results from our annual survey. And so a couple key points that we really focused on to see if we were doing a good job was, of course, the overall engagement number for the department. But, there's multiple factors that go into it. There's the employee metrics, there's organization-wide metrics, and then there's their manager. So we focus in on the employee specific and the manager because some things within the organization we don't have necessarily full control of. But the two areas that we really wanted to celebrate and focus on is looking at the question that really talked about, are you willing to go above and beyond for your work? And do you feel like you have sufficient time to do your work? Do you feel like your work unit is providing high quality and service? Do you feel like the job is making good use of your skills and abilities? So some of those key questions were really focus areas for us. And so when we had the survey that was done previous to us arriving at Bayhealth and then the survey results after, like just for the metric about going above and beyond, we had 22% increase in satisfaction associated with that question. And so that tells me leadership's doing something right.
Including the way you worded the question. Because the questions are worded in a way that require people to be introspective.
Yes.
And so if there is a cognitive dissonance about what's going on in the workplace, that the way that question is worded helps them identify it without them being challenged in some sort of way that would cause conflict between the manager and the individual. So again, just from the top, we were talking about messaging and telling the story, and even the way that you conduct that survey has people thinking about their story. Really well done. Just the way you rattled those questions off. I was really impressed with the way they were set up.
Thank you.
So final question here before we wrap, and this one went super fast. I was pretty excited. I've really enjoyed this one, Brian. And can you talk about like the different roles? Like, we're really trying to drive this, right? But everybody plays a different role, whether they're the leader, the frontline staff, or maybe there's cultural leaders and they're not necessarily identified by position or title, which is really important because when you started talking about just the way that everybody felt better and you could walk into the room, there are cultural leaders that are making that happen that have no identified role within the organization. So how do the people in each of those roles really help drive this satisfaction and maintain the momentum? Because sometimes this is something that gets achieved and then it waxes and it wanes. And I can imagine that your goal is not to, hey, we got the award. Okay, everybody relax and take the foot off the gas pedal. Your goal is to sustain this for as long as possible, hopefully forever.
Yeah. So when we talk about that in terms of change, like one of the things that I pride myself in, what I say my role is as the executive for the area, is I'm trying to set the tone and the strategy. So I'm really giving them kind of that roadmap and saying we need to set the good foundation, which is what really got us to the point where we were able to be, eligible for this award. But now, like we say, like you said there, we're going to not just kick back and say, hey, guess what? We're going to Disney World now, I guess, and we're just going to take a vacation. No, we have to step it up even further now, because now that we have that accolade, we have to live up to it every single day, and we got to keep exceeding it and getting better and better and better. And so what we've really started doing, at least from my role from the strategy perspective, is then going, let's kick it up a notch, people. So I'm trying to train my people on new things like, okay, you haven't really been in Epic very much. Let's figure out how do we leverage Epic better for some of our decision making and communication skills. How do we engage even further with surgeons? Why don't we have a surgeon become our medical director for sterile processing? What are the new things we can be doing and thinking outside the box to start engaging at an even higher level of quality? Our director has been our social officer almost too, because she's really united the department, but also built new connections with different areas that sterile processing hadn't previously been working with. So, for example, with our rehab services group, their speech language pathology department, she's connected the dots with them, and now we're actually owning and working with them to process their scopes and other instruments that they need. People call her now when they go, hey, I need to know what kind of disinfectant to use on these children's toys that we're trying to make sure we're keeping up. We want to have your expertise. Infection and Prevention Department is going, hey, we're defaulting to Sterile Processing's expertise in these key areas. And we even have different individuals outside of our division that you typically wouldn't think that Sterile Processing works with is now asking, how can we partner with you and what can we do to better our environments as well? And so she has really been helpful in keeping those connections outside of the department. But from the inside, it's really the informal leadership that keeps things going and keeps that morale going. Because as leadership, we can only do so much motivation. We're only so present. We're only so much time in the department. And so our frontline teams, and especially those who have been here with the longest tenure, have ended up being those cheerleaders and those people who have really boosted the morale because they know the difference between what it was and what it is now. And they want to keep it at what it is now. And so they're the most
They're
invested.
the storytellers.
They're the storytellers.
They're the storytellers so
Yes.
that everybody knows where they're at on the continuum.
Yes. And that's where we've seen the biggest gains there is the people who have been here forever. They've been able to say, oh, I know when it was terrible, and this is because, as you know, like you win an award and then new employees come in and you have turnover, people forget. And it's like you have to reset. And it's like, how do you keep telling that story?
And sometimes you get spoiled.
You do.
Because you come into a great situation and until they leave that environment
You do.
and have an experience that is the opposite or different, they don't necessarily know how good they have it.
Yeah, and we have people that have transferred to us from other hospitals in the region. I'm talking greater Delaware, Philadelphia, New Jersey areas. And they're all like, oh my God, this place is so good compared to what I had experienced previously. And they're like, I don't want to leave because this is what it should feel like. When I hear that, I'm like,
and you're like, yeah, me too, because I love the tax law in Delaware.
Wait, how'd you know about that?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The best kept secret.
It is. I could go on and on about my benefits, but definitely when we talk about the team being able to be those informal leaders for each other and to emphasize the message, it is invaluable. And that's a leader's dream, is to have the team advocating for themselves.
Yeah, that's true empowerment. And Brian, I got to tell you, I'm highly impressed. And after having talked to you live, there is just no doubt how this happened. It's very clear. And so kudos to you and your team. I know you don't want the accolade personally. That's how it happened. But congratulations for such a great job at the facility and for, I think, really giving the audience something to strive towards. And it's not the award. It's constant innovation, engagement, lifting the department up, connecting it, and gaining respect throughout the entire organization. Just again, well done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I do want to emphasize that point, Justin, is it wasn't about the award. The award's a nice thing to have. But like I said at the beginning, it was about the process of going through this and then realizing where we could continue to improve. And now it's just raised the bar even higher.
That was Brian Dolan, Vice President of Resource Management at Bayhealth Medical Center in Delaware. And Hank, what a great interview. So many good nuggets of information. What a great way to kick off season 13. So many things just running through my head while we were having that conversation. And what I really liked was when I asked Brian about how to get that culture from point A to point B and to clean house, one of the first things he said is you clean the slate for the staff. No matter what's been said, no matter what is there. And it reminds me of another conversation I had several years ago with a manager who has been a guest of this show. I just don't want to give a secret away without his permission. But he said, when I became the manager of this department, I came from this other state and came in and I told everybody, I don't care what has been before I came. And he would take their personnel files from the department and he put them in a shredder in front of each one of them as he met and said, today's a new day in this department. Every single one of you has a new clean slate. So whatever's been is gone. And I think that's really, really important. If you want overwhelming cultural change, whether you were part of the past or not, it's got to go because there is no future as long as the past continues to exist and hang some cloud or shroud over the department. So really just so happy to hear Brian's inspiration. And I really also liked the QA all day. Right. And when you talked about how do you measure this, I'm thinking to myself, you QA all day. You're constantly doing quality check-ins. And one of the ways that he did that was also to make sure that everything had been addressed. Is there anything that I can do for you right now or today to help sustain this for the long term?
And Justin, I know the title of this episode is about happy high performers, but that theme came through again and again as Brian was talking about all of the quality and all the efficiency improvements that came up. It always came back to the people, came back to the leaders, it came back to the team. And again, I'm not surprised, that a department like this and a leader like this would win this award, because if you focus on the people, the processes come with the people and the improvement comes with the people. And so I'm excited he got to tell that story. And I really hope that departments out there who are living in the shadow of low morale and of complaining and all the toxicity, I hope they hear that there is a way out. There's a way to fix this. And especially leaders and administrators, I hope they hear this episode and say, okay, if we want to fix it, it's not ultimately a money problem. It's not ultimately, at the end of the day, even a staffing problem. It's a cultural and a leadership issue that has to start at the top.
Yep, absolutely. Great episode. Looking forward to many more great interviews as we kick off season 13. Thank you to Brian Dolan. That's going to do it for this week's show. But as a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or on your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone application for iPhone and Android, including the bio for each of our guests during the season. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.